Everyone tells you the same thing growing up. Stay away from debt. Avoid it at all costs. Pay everything in cash. Live within your means. And on the surface, that sounds like smart advice, safe advice. But what if that exact mindset is the reason most people never build real wealth? Because while the average person is busy trying to stay debt-free, millionaires are doing the exact opposite. They're not running from debt. They're using it strategically, intentionally, and most importantly, profitably. In fact, some of the wealthiest people in the world didn't get rich by avoiding debt. They got rich because they understood something about it that most people never learn. And once that truth clicks, everything changes. So the real question is, what do they know about debt that you don't? Debt isn't the enemy. Here's the truth most people never hear. Debt itself isn't good or bad. It's neutral. It's simply a tool. And like any tool, it can either build something powerful or completely destroy you, depending on how you use it. The problem is, most people don't see debt this way. They see it emotionally. They associate it with stress, bills, and struggle. They think of credit card balances, loans they regret, and the pressure of monthly payments. So their natural reaction is fear. Avoid it. Eliminate it. Stay as far away as possible. But millionaires don't think emotionally about debt. They think strategically. They don't ask, is debt dangerous? They ask, can this debt make me money? And that single shift changes everything. Because once you remove emotion and start looking at debt as a tool, you begin to realize there are actually two completely different types of debt. One quietly drains your wealth and keeps you stuck, while the other has the potential to accelerate your path to financial freedom. And most people never learn the difference. The two types of debt. To really understand how millionaires use debt to get richer, you first need to separate something most people lump together, and that's the difference between bad debt and good debt. Because not all debt plays the same role in your life. Bad debt is the kind most people are familiar with. It's tied to lifestyle spending, things that feel good in the moment, but don't create any long-term value. Think about buying the latest phone on credit, financing expensive clothes, or taking out a loan for a car that immediately starts losing value the moment you drive it. These are depreciating items. They don't put money in your pocket. They take money out. And the worst part? You're paying interest on something that's becoming less valuable over time. That's how bad debt quietly keeps people stuck, earning, spending, and repeating the cycle. Good debt, on the other hand, works very differently. This is the kind of debt that's tied to income-producing assets or investments. Instead of draining your finances, it has the potential to generate money. For example, using a loan to buy rental property that brings in monthly income, or borrowing capital to start or expand a business that produces profit. In these cases, the debt isn't just a burden, it's a tool helping you grow. The key difference is simple but powerful. Bad debt funds your lifestyle, while good debt builds your future. And once you start seeing debt through that lens, everything begins to change. How millionaires use debt. Now that you understand the difference, this is where things start to get interesting, because millionaires don't just avoid bad debt. They actively use good debt as a tool to grow their wealth faster than most people think is possible. The first way they do this is through leverage. Instead of waiting years to save up enough money to buy something outright, they use borrowed money to control bigger assets today. Imagine trying to buy a rental property worth $100,000. The average person might spend years saving for it, hoping one day they'll have enough. But a millionaire thinks differently. They might only put down a fraction of that amount, borrow the rest, and gain control of the entire asset immediately. Now they own something that can appreciate in value and generate income without having to wait years. That's leverage. It allows them to play a bigger game with less of their own money. But it doesn't stop there. Millionaires are obsessed with cash flow. They don't just take on debt randomly. They make sure the debt pays for itself. In other words, the asset they buy with borrowed money generates enough income to cover the loan and still leave profit behind. Think of that same rental property. If it brings in monthly rent that exceeds the loan payment, expenses, and maintenance, the debt is no longer a burden. It's being handled by the asset itself. The money is working, not them. Another advantage they have is access to cheaper capital. Because of their financial position, creditworthiness, and existing assets, millionaires can borrow money at lower interest rates. And this is crucial. When money is cheap, it becomes easier to use it as a tool for growth. Instead of seeing interest as a trap, they see it as a cost of doing business, a small price to pay for a larger return. And perhaps the biggest advantage of all is speed. The average person tries to build wealth slowly by saving. But saving alone can take decades. Millionaires use debt to accelerate the process. Instead of waiting 10 or 15 years to afford one investment, they use borrowed capital to acquire multiple opportunities much sooner. That speed compounds. One asset leads to another, and over time, that momentum creates exponential growth. So while most people are taught to avoid debt and move cautiously, millionaires are using it to move faster, think bigger, and build wealth on a completely different level. Why most people stay trapped? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people aren't trapped in debt because they don't earn enough. They're trapped because of how they use money when they do get it. And once you understand that, the pattern becomes very clear. A huge reason is debt for status. People don't just borrow money for needs. They borrow to look successful. A car they can't really afford, a phone upgrade they didn't need, furniture, fashion, lifestyle choices that signal wealth on the outside while quietly draining it on the inside. It becomes a cycle of trying to impress people who are also struggling financially. So instead of building wealth, they're building appearances. Then there are emotional decisions. Most financial choices aren't actually logical. They're emotional. People buy things when they feel stressed, bored, pressured, or even excited. Debt becomes a quick escape. I deserve this becomes the justification. And before they realize it, small emotional purchases stack into long-term financial pressure. Another major trap is fear of investing. Many people avoid anything that involves risk, even calculated risk. They hear investment and immediately think loss. So instead of learning how money can grow, they focus only on protecting what little they have. Ironically, that fear of losing money often guarantees they never grow it in the first place. And underneath all of this is something deeper: lack of financial education. Most people were never taught how money actually works. They were taught to earn it, spend it, and maybe save a little. But they were never taught how debt, leverage, or assets function in real wealth building. So they repeat what they see around them, not what actually works. And when you put all of this together, it's easy to see why so many people feel stuck. Not because they're lazy, but because they were never shown a different way to play the game. The mindset shift. This is where everything starts to change, because wealth isn't just about money, it's about mindset. And the biggest difference between how poor and rich people use debt comes down to one simple question. Most people think like this: can I afford the monthly payment? That question sounds responsible, even smart. But it keeps you focused on survival. It makes you look at money as something to manage carefully, so you don't fall behind. So every decision becomes about avoiding discomfort, avoiding risk, and staying safe. Millionaires think completely differently. They ask, will this make me money? That's it. Not, can I afford it? But, can this asset generate more value than it costs? That shift changes debt from a burden into a strategy, because when you think like a consumer, you use money to buy things that disappear in value the moment you get them. But when you think like an investor, you use money, even borrowed money, to acquire things that grow, produce income, or open new opportunities. And this is the real identity shift. Consumers focus on expenses, investors focus on returns. Consumers think in terms of cost, investors think in terms of opportunity. One mindset keeps you working for money. The other makes money start working for you. Once you see debt through this lens, it stops being something to fear and starts becoming something to evaluate. Not, should I avoid it? But, does this move me closer to income or further away from it? And that single shift is often what separates those who stay stuck financially from those who begin building real wealth. Smart Debt Framework. Now let's make this practical, because understanding debt is one thing, but using it wisely is what actually changes your financial future. Millionaires don't just take debt randomly. They follow simple but strict rules that protect them while helping them grow. The first rule is simple. Only borrow for income-producing assets. If the debt is not tied to something that can generate money, it's usually not worth it. That means focusing on things like businesses, real estate, or investments that have the potential to create cash flow. If what you're borrowing for doesn't have a clear path to return more than it costs, it's not leverage, it's liability. The second rule is understanding risk before borrowing. Smart money never moves blindly. Before taking on any debt, they calculate outcomes. What happens if things go well? What happens if things go wrong? Can the investment survive slow months or unexpected changes? This level of thinking prevents emotional decisions and reduces financial surprises. The third rule is avoiding lifestyle debt completely. Millionaires don't use debt to fund appearances. They don't borrow to look rich. They borrow to build wealth. Anything tied to status, luxury, or short-term satisfaction is usually paid in cash or avoided altogether. Because they understand something important. Lifestyle debt quietly limits long-term freedom. And finally, they start small and learn. No one begins with massive deals or complex investments. They test, they learn, they make mistakes on a small scale first. Over time, their understanding grows, and so does their confidence. Debt becomes less intimidating and more strategic. When you follow these principles, debt stops being something dangerous in your life and starts becoming a tool you can actually control and use with purpose. Reality check. Before you start thinking debt is some kind of shortcut to wealth, there's something important you need to understand. Debt is powerful, but it is not safe. In fact, if it's used without knowledge or discipline, it can destroy your financial life faster than almost anything else. The same tool that builds wealth for millionaires is the same tool that traps millions of people in stress, repayments, and financial pressure. The difference is not the debt itself, it's the behavior behind it. Millionaires are not reckless with debt. They are extremely calculated. Every decision is backed by numbers, strategy, and a clear understanding of risk and return. They don't guess, and they don't borrow emotionally. If the deal doesn't make sense, they walk away, even if it looks attractive on the surface. And this is where discipline becomes everything. Without discipline, debt becomes a burden. With discipline, it becomes leverage. The tool doesn't change, the user does. So while debt can absolutely help you grow wealth, it demands respect. It requires patience, learning, and control. Otherwise, it will do the opposite of what you intended. So now you've seen it. Debt isn't just something to fear or avoid. It's a tool. And like every powerful tool, it depends entirely on who is using it and how it's being used. Most people will go back to seeing debt the same way they always have. Something dangerous, something stressful, something to stay away from. But if you've followed this far, you now see what most people don't. You've been exposed to a completely different way of thinking. One that separates consumers from investors and survival from wealth building. This is the real shift. You are no longer just someone trying to avoid financial mistakes. You are starting to understand how money actually moves, how leverage works, how assets are built, how the wealthy think before they act. And that changes your identity. You're no longer just asking, "How do I stay out of debt?" You're starting to ask, "How do I use money and tools in a smarter way?" Because the truth is, millionaires aren't different because they have access to magic opportunities. They're different because they see the same tools everyone else sees, but they use them differently. And once you understand that, you don't look at money the same way again. Because in the end, debt doesn't make people rich or poor. The way they think about it does.